learning can be difficult. Hear me out. So, before you learn something that completely changes your worldview, you can consider yourself as having been in a state of blissful ignorance. I never really understood that term until, I started learning. And learning dangerously. Learning in such a way that the system is shocked. The system of my mind and body is somewhat shocked after it learns certain things. So blissful ignorance is one thing, but blissful ignorance is only blissful up to a point, because there comes a point where your ignorance is actually going to cause harm to you, if not you, to the people around you. If not the people around you, the world, which is you and the people around you. So unfortunately, there is no justification for remaining in a state of blissful ignorance. One of the learnings that made me transition from that blissful ignorance to a somewhat shocked new worldview is the idea of pristine wilderness. Pristine wilderness does not exist. Okay, that might sound very, very strange to somebody who hasn't considered the question in any serious way, and who just, like myself, before I had learned about nature, wilderness, and what these things actually are, I just assumed that nature was that thing out there like the Amazon rainforest, the Congo basin, Borneo rainforest, these places where contamination by human activities has not yet comprehensively occurred. Maybe a small bit, but not to the full extent that it has in, say, urban places and suburban civilization. So that contaminating influence of human presence is itself an artifact of the artificiality of the concept of wilderness. Whoa. So, it's from this artificial concept of wilderness that the idea of humans as a contaminating presence or influence stems. So let's just quickly cover the historical roots of wilderness. It really comes from North America and the westward push of Europeans across the North American continent. So with this came a serious change to the land and land use, because obviously the Native Americans or Amerindians, these people interacted with their surrounding ecology in a much different way to the way that the Europeans, with much more advanced technologies, interacted with their surrounding ecology. So with this change in surrounding ecology from what the Europeans first encountered to what was left in their wake, the Europeans turned around and looked over their shoulder and they said, what the hell are we doing to this landscape? We're completely altering it, and if we don't put a stop to our incessant march, technological march westward, if we don't at least preserve some of the nature that we first encountered, then it will all be wiped out. So maybe there's a bit of sentimentality, like the Europeans wanted to maintain some of the nature they had first encountered as they were expanding westward across the North American continent. So, but their concept of what nature was when they first encountered it, the nature they first encountered had actually already been altered by Europeans in some ways. So in his book 1493, Charles C. Mann goes through some of the more subtle ways that Europeans altered the North American continent. One example is that in the ballast of the ships that they sailed in to get to the continent, the North American continent, were organisms, species, flora and fauna that couldn't distribute themselves that far across the globe of their own accord, but did do so as a result of human movement and humans being able to cross the Atlantic. So one species, and this shocked me, and I'm still not sure if this is true, but just taking Charles C. Mann on his word in his book, earthworms were never on the North American continent, not until Europeans made it there. That's kind of shocking. But earthworms completely altered the look and feel, the texture of the, say, forest ecology in North America, because now instead of the leaf litter decomposing completely on the surface of the soil, the earthworms were coming up and pulling down that leaf litter for it to be decomposed within the soil, which changed soil characteristics. As you'd expect, because the leaf litter is now being incorporated into the soil substrate as opposed to remaining on top of it. So that completely changed the look and feel of the North American forest ecology. But there are other ways as well. Microorganisms were a big thing. The microbes that the Europeans brought across. Obviously, actually, this is Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs and Steel. Germs did most of the heavy lifting when it came to the genocidal activities of Europeans when they reached the North American continent. It was germs, smallpox, and other diseases for which the Native Americans had no natural immunity because they had never encountered these diseases. And then you say, so why did the Europeans encounter these diseases? And that was because Europeans were farming for a much longer time than were the Native Americans. And with the close contact with their farm animals, viruses could co-evolve alongside the animals and the humans. And so both animals and humans, European humans, developed a natural immunity slowly over time. So by the time the Europeans reached the North American continent, they had complete immunity to these diseases. But the North Americans had no immunity. So when they transferred their viruses to them, boom, massive genocide. Then there's the next very interesting point about the ultimate reason, not the proximate, but the ultimate reason for, okay, why did Europeans then develop those diseases? It was farming, but okay, why did Europeans farm so much more than the North Americans? And it was simply by look of geography. They had, in their surrounding geography, a set of wild animals, populations of wild animals, a subset of which were conducive to becoming domesticated and farmed. So there were like wild boars became pigs, wild bovine became cattle, wild horses became domesticated tamed horses. There's more, but those three just serve as examples. Whereas on the Americas, they didn't have nearly as many wild populations of animals that were susceptible to becoming domesticated. So that's fascinating. Anyway, so nature is not really as natural as we would like to believe. It's deeply affected by humans. And this is where the contaminating influence of humans is just blown out of the water. It's like, that doesn't make sense, because humans indirectly affect their surrounding ecology massively. The example being the earthworms. Like, no humans, even though humans aren't present on the certain pieces of land where the earthworms are, their effects, indirect effects of their presence, are right there on that land. So it's like, humans aren't contaminating, unless you want to continue believing that humans are contaminating, in which case you're going to have to get rid of the earthworms in North America. And it's like, is that going to happen? I don't think that's going to happen. Oh, and nature also. The conception of nature. Nature as first encountered by the Europeans in their westward expansion, that had already been massively altered by their indirect effects of what they had done in the areas just prior to reaching the most frontier area on the westward expansion, if that makes sense. So this has massive implications for conservationism and conservationists nowadays, because it's like, what nature do we want to conserve? That's a deep question. Do we want to conserve nature as it is conceived of by these 18th and 19th century writers who may have gotten it wrong? Or do we want to reconsider and reevaluate what nature is and how humans and nature should interact and should relate to one another? And I guess that gets to the deeper question of like our values. What is it about this world that we want to keep, and what is it that we want to prevent from happening, and what is it about our actions that we would like to stop before they reach a self-terminating dead end? These are all deep questions that I think it's on our generation as young people to step up and begin fleshing out the problem set as much as we can, such that the solution set becomes that bit more clear and obvious to reach. I think I'm gonna plug a quote right here, right now. I think it was Einstein who said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes defining the solution." So it's our task, as I see it, to define the problem.